Okay, so hopefully they explain that clearly, how female condoms are used, how they're inserted. Apparently my internet has gone down in the middle of my lecture. Perfect. So the one thing I would like to say about female condoms with regard to effectiveness, it seems like it should be sort of really straightforward how to use them, and they should be really, their theoretical and their actual should match. But it turns out that theoretically there would be a 5% failure rate, and in actual use it's 20% failure rate. And one of the best explanations for that actual use failure rate is, well, there's two. Probably the most common failure is that instead of the penis going into the female condom, it's next to it. So the penis is actually not being encased by the female condom at all, and sperm is being delivered directly into the vagina, and neither user is actually aware of the fact that the penis actually missed the condom. So that seems like a really, really basic step, that if you're going to be using female condoms, you make sure that the penis goes inside the female condom. The number two factor that can reduce the effectiveness is that people oftentimes think that if one birth control method is good, then doubling them up is better, right? And that's true for almost all of the things we've talked about. The only thing that does not improve the efficacy of a female condom is a male condom. If you're using a female condom, you do not use a male condom too, because the male condom will provide friction that can break the female condom. And so you don't want to have that happen. So you use female condoms in conjunction with spermicides, or in conjunction with birth control pills, or something else, but not with a male condom. So the advantages it's all the same as male condoms, but it has the additional advantage of you can actually insert the female condom up to 8 hours before sex without running the risk of toxic shock or something else. And so I'm kind of laughing because it's kind of an interesting image to think about, isn't it? To insert your female condom ahead of time. But then you don't have to then, say, oh, excuse me, I have to go in the bathroom or something like that. It's already there and ready to go. But you have to still make sure that the opening of the condom is over the opening of the vagina, so that the penis ends up inside the condom and not inside the empty vagina or the unprotected vagina. So there's another advantage, and again, I didn't put this on my slide, but I wanted to mention that male partners often report that female condoms feel better than male condoms, because the male penis gets to move within the vagina rather than being encased by the latex condom that's going to be moving with the penis. So male partners oftentimes report that they prefer female condoms once they've used them. So I just thought I'd throw that in as an advantage. Disadvantages, all the same problems as the male condom. It's not as readily available as male condoms. You can find female condoms in like sex positive outlets. Here in the state of Washington, we have a store called Lovers. They sell them. You can get them online, of course, but they are not as readily available as male condoms, and they cost more. So they're made out of polyurethane rather than latex. And so polyurethane condoms for men cost more than latex condoms cost too. So it's partly because of the polyurethane. It's also partly due to the, lack of demand. And so they have to charge more per each item, things like that. But a lot of people who have used female condoms report that they're really happy with them compared to male condoms. So I would just like to put it out there as something people can try. Okay, we have a few other barrier methods that all involve sticking something into the vagina. So brace yourself, put on your cervical cap, because here we go. So you can put on your hats. Okay, anyway, sorry. Jokes don't make it that well on disembodied lectures, do they? So here we have a picture of a cervical cap on the left, and it's designed to cover the opening of the cervix and basically suction onto it. So the woman would use her finger to insert the cervical cap into the vagina, and then feel around and make sure that cervical cap is lodged on the opening of the cervix. Now, any women who are listening and thinking to themselves, how do I know it's on the cervix? That's probably the number one problem with the cervical cap. So if you have a person who's never had a baby, theoretically 9% would become pregnant in a year of using the cervical cap, but in actual use, it's almost twice that. If they've had a baby, the theoretical effectiveness of the cervical cap is 26% of women would become pregnant in a year of using it. And in actual use, it's about 32%. After having a baby, the cervix takes on a different shape and has a wider opening. And that's probably why the cervical cap doesn't work as well for women who have had babies. But if we look at the people who haven't, the women who haven't had babies, that actual use number implies that it's difficult to use. And one big error that's commonly made is that the cervix, the opening of the cervix is not completely covered. It's partly revealed and there's an opening for sperm to get up. So the advantages, again, stopping at any time and having minimal risks are definite advantages, right? Also, a little bit of spontaneity as an advantage because you can insert the cervical cap up to 8 hours prior to sex. You wouldn't want to leave it in longer than that because of the risks of toxic shock, but it does have that benefit that you can insert it ahead of time if you know where this evening is going. Disadvantages, like I said, really easy to use incorrectly. You have to leave it in for 6 hours after sex. So if you put it in up to 8 hours before and you left it in for 6 hours after, you are going to have an elevated toxic shock risk. Toxic shock occurs when bacteria get trapped inside of the vagina or the uterus and start to grow and multiply and then ultimately enter the bloodstream, and it's deadly. So it is a real risk. It's not appropriate for women with certain kinds of vaginal issues. Women who have a tipped uterus, for one thing, it doesn't work very well for them. And we're going to talk about that more. But women who have vaginosis, which means that they've got painful swelling of their vaginal lining, it's not going to work very well for them. Women who have frequent bacterial infections in their vagina, it's not appropriate for them. If they've ever had toxic shock before, they should not be using this method. So it's not for everyone. And I would also add in that a disadvantage is that it involves a lot of intimate knowledge of your own anatomy. And as we've talked about throughout this class, a lot of women struggle with that and don't really want to be inserting something and really having to explore and make sure that it's where it belongs. And then when it's time to get it back out, you have to put your fingers back in and pull it back out. And so a lot of women just don't like it. The diaphragm used to be a very popular method of birth control, and it's not very popular anymore. And there's a couple of reasons why. It's first off, this is obtained from a doctor, and you have to go and have your cervix measured, and so you have to be fitted for a diaphragm. It works a lot like the cervical cap, which is something that you don't have to be fitted for. The cervical cap you can actually buy over the counter. With the diaphragm, you fill it with spermicidal cream or jelly, and then you fold it in half and insert it into the vagina. And again, you try and place it so that it's encompassing the opening of the uterus. But one thing that the diaphragm has to its advantage is that it's loaded with this spermicidal cream or jelly. And so any sperm that get over the edge are likely to be killed by that. But the effectiveness is, it's better than the cervical cap, but it's still, 12% failure rate per year for women using this technique in actual use. So the advantages, pretty much all the same as the cervical cap, right? The disadvantages have the same exact problems as the cervical cap, plus that needing a prescription aspect. And then also, if a woman gains or loses any weight, really, 10 pounds, she has to go get refitted. So it's something that needs more maintenance than some of the other methods that we've talked about. Now, this is a birth control method that's no longer on the market. This in the U.S. it used to be marketed as the Today's Sponge, and the idea was that it was basically like a diaphragm. You'll notice the shape is very reminiscent of the diaphragm, but it's made out of a latex. I want to say foam, but that's not the right word. Sort of latex, like what would be in a cushion, right? Having difficulty coming up with the word for a foamy cushion that's not dissolvable. sponge. It's a sponge. So it's made out of this very tight, you know how like your dish sponge might have big holes in it, and then maybe a sponge that's used for putting makeup on your face would have really tight pores on it. This is more like the kind of sponge that you would use on your face. And then it's impregnated with spermicide. So to use the sponge, you have to get it wet, and then you squeeze it to get, activate the spermicide, make sure it's all foamy. And then you insert it into the vagina, covering the cervix. And then you see that there's that ribbon there. That's what's going to allow you to pull it back out after intercourse. The idea is that the sperm will get absorbed into the sponge. The spermicide will kill the sperm. And so then, after you've waited the amount of time that you're supposed to wait to make sure that it's killed everything off, then you remove the sponge and you discard it. It didn't require a prescription. It was relatively inexpensive. It cost maybe 4 times as much as like a condom, right? So it was relatively inexpensive. It got pulled from the market here in the U.S. because there were some hygiene issues in the factory that was producing them. And so some women were contracting toxic shock from using the sponge. And so it was pulled from the market here in the U.S. It's still available under other, factories and things like that around the world. As far as I know, I did a search right before I started this lecture and could not find any brands that are currently on the market here in the U.S. But I thought I'd share with you this little clip from Seinfeld when the Today sponge went off the market, and Elaine used it as her primary birth control method. She had to develop a new way of deciding which of her boyfriends was actually worth wasting a sponge on. So I'll let you watch that for a little amusement, and I'll see you on the other side.